Hey everybody, welcome back to another one of our world building bonus episodes. Been a little bit of time since we've done one of these. I'm joined today by Eden.
Hello.
And we are going to be taking a look today at some of the other countries surrounding our sort of main setting of Vallanna. I've recently expanded our world map to sort of show a bit of a wider view of the continent that we're on, so we've definitely got a bit more room now to kind of give some extra sort of fleshing out of these sort of neighbouring nations. And so I figured what we'd do today would just sort of keep it fairly vague, because most of them are just blobs of land masses on a map at the moment. Just give a little bit of a flavour, sort of a taster of the flavour of each of them, maybe sort of. So we've got a vague idea of what's going on in the surrounding area. That's
indeed
pretty much the thought.
Let's get cracking, shall we?
Let's
point
do
out a particular location. Have you got one that you want to start on?
Well, I thought, as it's been a little while since we've done a world building one as well, I will just remind everybody that you can find all of our maps and things on our World Anvil page that's a longer URL than I thought it was going to be. I will link it on our Twitter. Say it that way.
I think if you Google search for Vallanna, Vallanna, you should be able to find it.
That should come up. Let's hang on. Let's put that to the test. Helps when I spell it right.
I believe that works. I've tried it before, if memory serves.
Well, there's a lot of wine companies called that.
Okay, all right. Vallanna pretending with dice. If you Google for that, 100% you'll find it.
I would hope so, right? You know,
surely.
Yes, there we go.
Surely my Google foo is good enough to get the correct search done for that.
You can get it through Google, but I will link it on our Twitter anyway. So like I say, you can find all of our stuff on our World Anvil page. There's all of the maps that we'll be talking about, as well as a whole bunch of articles and things about our custom setting on there. So check it out. As you're saying, sort of pick a starting point. Well, we've talked a little bit before, again, kind of vaguely, about Kingdom of Ashala, which is like the neighbour to the immediate west of Vallanna. And this is the one that I've kind of got the most detail of already, in that I've sort of peppered it with a bunch of actual named settlements instead of just random dots on the map. But in my head, I had this as basically being, if Vallanna is kind of like a sort of mishmash of the UK and Germany sort of cultural style, Ashala is 100% just France.
I could see a little bit from the location names. There was something coming out about the tone of them all. I was like, this has got a French overtone, but that's no bad thing.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's just France.
So what era are we talking about though? Because there's a few different times, I suppose, to point to. Are we talking about like pre-revolution? So there's like aristocracy and that kind of stuff, or is it like a post-revolution where there's the culture and what have you? But
there is a queen, so there's a queen and a full aristocracy. I guess not just France. I suppose it's more kind of leaning a little bit towards the vibe of Orlais in the Dragon Age games.
I can see it as being like a lot of the time in fantasy, you end up with a kind of mishmash of, it's mostly just European nobility, because they ultimately were like moving between countries and what have you, and they're all kind of incestuously related to each other in many instances. There was kind of a European culture of sorts, I suppose, during the 1600s in particular, that I think perhaps that, to me at least, that's where I see a lot of fantasy stuff being drawn from, is there's that feeling of like, yes, there's upper class nobility, there's knights with orders, as it were, that kind of stuff is going on.
For sure, yeah, that's definitely a kind of the vibe I'm sort of getting from Ashala, really. It's sort of I said it's a lot of courtly intrigue and that, and a lot of like you say, knights and sort of barons and I guess, but whatever the French word for barons is, but they all have got their own little sort of fiefdoms and such, which I guess more than in Vallanna, there's more of a kind of sort of vibe of like, okay, we all kind of pay homage to the Queen of Ashala, but we were all a little bit more concerned with our own deal, if that makes sense. Whereas in my head, Vallanna's got but there's a little bit of that. We've talked before about some, selfish barons and things. I think when we were talking about the guy in Riffview and such. But by and large, it's a bit more of a cohesive country. Whereas Ashala, maybe there's, they're all quite. This is gonna sound like I'm just knocking the French, but the vibe of like the local lords are a little bit more sort of like, they'll go to court and sort of pay their dues and things, but they are sort of little kind of lords of their own little bits who are nominally part of Ashala, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see it as being like these are the sorts of leaders that recognise that they're stronger together, but there's only so far they want that to go. They still want to have their little slice, and they will bend so far for the crown.
Yes,
but the fact is that if the crown of Ashala turned and the royal family turned around to the lords and ladies of the land and were like, "Okay, we want to take X amount of money and goods, and we're going to take your people to wage a war," they might immediately face a division at that point. Have it where it's like, yeah, you'll have some parts, there's some regions that are completely dedicated to the crown, and that's your stronghold. But then maybe 2/3 of everybody else are kind of umming and ahhing and dragging their feet about helping, which could, in a situation where, like, if the nation was under threat, they might have a little bit of a harder time getting united in the first place.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I kind of had a thought that, like you say, there's quite a few that they're not sure that in the times of the worst amount of crisis they can count on, but like who maybe might be a little bit more concerned with like old grudges with the neighbouring lord than whatever is threatening the country hundreds of miles away, if that makes sense. So they're not willing to put aside petty squabbles and stuff quite so much.
You'll have to forgive me if I mispronounce this entirely. Capital city of Eternity.
Eternité? That's a very good question. I did put an accent on the E at the end, so I was kind of thinking Eternité. But yeah, look, it's all changeable.
I'm just looking at it positioning-wise and what we were just saying there about, like, you've perhaps got a few lords and ladies that are not going to be the ones that immediately fall in line. I can't help but think that it would be the people out towards the border in locations like Caviel or Etmont, where perhaps these are locations that are close enough to the border that they've had regular cultural interactions with the neighbours over on the other side. They recognise the value of the trade. They see that it's not just within their own country that their profits come from. So they would recognise the fact that, like, hey, if you want us to go to war with the neighbours next door, that means an entire upheaval for the way of life around there. So those would be the settlements where perhaps you'd have those lords and ladies that would turn around, and when they're summoned to court and told, hey, pull up arms and get ready for a fight, they might kind of go, do you recognize that we kind of need those guys on the other side of the border?
Yeah, like a call to arms. A call to arms might go out, and there would be a much stronger response from those who aren't day-to-day interacting with the people who they're fighting against. And like there might be some conspicuous absences when the armies are marshalled and such.
That's it. And I can't help but imagine that it's the kind of thing where you'd have an intrigue of sorts where, I mean, there's enough settlements along that border where if they would start a fight with anybody, it'd be the kind of situation where you'd have to have perhaps a contingency of loyalists traveling along that border, going from town to town, kind of making sure that everything's in line. And because it's the kind of thing where I would imagine that, hey, one or two of those lords or ladies would turn around and probably just go like, hey, we'd actually rather be on the other side of the border when this fight finishes, so we'll actually help the enemy and help the border shift so that we end up on the side where we'll profit more, or where we agree with the cultural side of things or whatever.
Maybe we don't report quite so diligently on enemy troop movements and such. Yeah. I also had the thought that, like, with it being more kind of a lot of small kind of lords in charge of their own bits, rather than there being like it'd be quite a decentralized military force. Like each place has their own sort of troops, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's why I think that's immediately where my mind was going, with that sense of like perhaps a royal guard or a contingency from the capital would have to be there as sort of like They would have to go from place to place with their limited numbers, but perhaps better training, and roll up and kind of be like, look, remember that you're under our flag, and we're the guys that will roll up if you actually try and fight us. And here's a reminder of what we're capable of.
Yeah.
One of our men will take 20 of yours, so fall in line.
Yeah. I like the vibe of that. The other thing I think mainly to say about Ashala is that there is the kind of geographical division where the nation is kind of almost split in the middle by the western end of the Icebine Mountains. So I kind of thought that maybe there would be a sort of vibe of like, there's the southern group who are maybe even less sort of not loyal, because they still consider themselves part of Ashala, and like there's probably some that are very loyal, but there is very much like maybe they're the neglected southern regions, if that makes sense, when it comes to attention from the capital.
Yeah, it would strike me as the kind of thing where, like, in historical terms, perhaps you would have like a vassalized state or something, or at least historically that's what it might have been, and perhaps in order to sort of shore up a little bit of political strength, you would marry off a member of the royal family to somebody down there, somebody that's a little bit down the chain. They'll never actually get to the throne, but it's a show of faith that, like, hey, look, you Southerners are part of the fucking royalty.
Yeah.
We've got one of our family members down there married to one of yours. That's the proof, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, as I said, I get the feeling there'd be a lot of courtly intrigue and that.
Yeah. Politicking left, right, and centre, and a lot of backstabbing and kind of trying to find an angle to get further up the chain.
A lot of lip service, not a lot being actually said.
Yeah, and as a result, and again, this just feeds back into that level of instability where it's sort of like push comes to shove, and the entire country's under threat, and they all recognise it. Yeah, they'll all actually fight together, but it's going to take actually being pushed right to the limit before they do that, because everybody around them is a kind of a Littlefinger from Game of Thrones type thinker, where it's like, I'm just waiting for the pieces on the board to be in the right position, and boom, I'm going to move them with my checkmate move.
Yeah, and
but
even maybe
everybody's trying to move their checkmate, and they've all got one piece. They're kind of fighting themselves. It's not going to happen.
And maybe not. I would think that probably most of the time it wouldn't even be so big as to be like, when I make my move, I will be king or I will be queen. It might even just be like, I would totally not have any qualms about using the dirtiest of dirty tactics and politicking and such, just to get one up on the guy who owns the castle 15 miles away.
That local politicking. I mean, you'd have those levels of it where at the very bottom level you've got the kind of the new aspiring warlord, as it were, or the lord of the land, that's kind of like, he's worried about his next door neighbor. And maybe you've got some older guys or older women that have gone up the chain a little bit. They've had a few of those conflicts, they've gained some prestige, they've gained a little bit of land around their original settlement or whatever, and then they start getting those kind of like, okay, so I'm going up in the world, maybe I can start looking towards the throne. And in those crisis times, you perhaps only have like a small handful of them, but it would still be that thing of like, that handful are all at odds with each other. And beneath them are the next level of people trying to come up. So it's sort of like on all sides, you've got like people trying. It's almost the crab bucket analogy of sort of the crab that tries to climb out of the bucket. Everyone underneath them is trying to pull them back down. And ultimately, if the guy that owns the bucket sees the crab trying to climb out, he'll knock it straight back in as well. So good luck getting out of the bucket, crab.
I also can't help but think of that Simpsons bit where Mr. Burns goes to the doctor and he's got so many diseases that none of them are really getting. They're all stuck in the door together, so
there's like a weird equilibrium going on where it's like, everything's fighting everything, and as such, nothing else can get in here to have a fight and win, because this battle is raging so wildly. But it would be the kind of thing where it's like what we're talking about is, it's not like on the surface type stuff. It would be, as I said, a lot of politicking and a lot of snide remarks and trade deals that are half honoured by one party and the other party is trying to take a bit of the off the top, as it were, without being noticed. Constant issues like that.
I can't. The other thing as well is, again, this is just us being like, okay, which parts of French history can we adapt to this? But I also can't help but feel like maybe it's one of those things where there's maybe a bit more of a class division, or at least noticeable class division, in Ashala than there is in Vallanna, if that makes sense.
Vallanna seems like a fairly kind of like, it's not necessarily run by the proletariat, but it's a workers.
Oh no, there's definitely nobility and stuff, but there's you're not likely to get stabbed to death by the Baron's guards for saying something wrong, if that makes sense. At least in most places. Whereas
perhaps Ashala could have a certain bit of 16th century Italy about it, braggadocio, and the I bite my thumb at you comes to mind. Is that kind of thing of like, you could have an offence to a man's honour in the kingdom of Ashala, where perhaps, and that would be used as an excuse more than anything else, because that's really historically what those things was just excuses for thuggish people to be thuggish people.
Yeah.
But that within the rule of law could be fine. But
I was thinking actually more in terms of like the interactions with like the between the peasantry and the nobles. Rather than between nobles. When it came to that, I meant to sort of like.
But you can still apply that though, insofar as like if the peasant that's supposed to be working the vineyard does not bow his head as he goes past, that's an affront to the noble, and he can take him to task, and that will be part of the class structure. Because if the nobles have already got it where they can't affront each other, oh good God, if a slave affronts somebody, then they are in for it.
Yeah.
They're truly there to be made an example of.
So maybe spinning on 200-300 years in the future from our current setting, there might be some kind of revolution brewing at some point.
Not yet though.
Not just yet though. I don't want to have to put a lot of work into coming up with like a royal family and royal politics and everything, and then we run one campaign set in Ashala, and all of a sudden they're bringing out the guillotines. Ashalans of the world unite and all that. But I kind of, like I say, this is very much turned into like, okay, so this is the French analog and such. But I kind of like that sort of vibe to it.
In fantasy, as well as I'm concerned, everything requires a basis in humanity, and what better basis have we got than history?
Yeah,
and I think it's one of those things where it's sort of like the value of media comes through to me, at least, in this thing of like, well, we can capture human nature without actually directly pointing at historical events, but we do have to capture the truth of the cause and effect of things. And in that, it's easiest to look at history and be like, well, you can see certain dynamics at play and how that then played out, I guess, how these things spin out, the ideas, the foundational thoughts of certain eras are then put into society, and you see the behaviors of people adjusted by that.
Yeah. I think as well, just in terms of kind of terms of our setting here, I think I can't see it being like out of the, it makes sense that there's a peace between Ashala and Vallanna. They've maybe had some disagreements in the past, but like by and large they kind of get on, especially because of the close border. There's a lot of trade over the border. There's quite a few settlements sort of along the border and that. So it's not in anyone's interest at the moment to start a big fight. But there's enough of a sort of cultural difference between the two nations to have it be that sort of like, okay, there's very much like a different vibe between the two of them, as I say, especially from the point of view of the sort of regular man on the street,
Well, what we were talking about already, that idea of if they had to go to war, perhaps that's already happened. Perhaps there was a point during the past where both kingdoms had decided that, hey, enough is enough, it's time for a fight. They've had this experience of like, it didn't benefit either of them to do it. Perhaps it really was better for them to just keep working together, and now they've just gotten to this kind of like, hey, we're not going to fight you, you're not going to fight us, we're not going to try and change each other's cultures, so we'll just sit on each side of our borders, and that's best for us, right?
Well, we can tie this actually into the established kind of events that, as few and far between as they actually are in our setting so far. I've kind of already had it written that they were allies in the Demon War, So perhaps before that, they were kind of forced together in that sort of conflict, and kind of came together and even, were part of the big final battle together and everything as nations.
Yeah, so that's a perfect reason for them to recognise the fact is like we're all in it together. Perhaps you have it where they felt at some point that their cultural divide was so strong that's why they had their fight. Demon War starts kicking off, and they recognise, look, greater threat here, we're going to have to start fighting together.
Yeah.
Through their act of fighting together and their strongest of strongmen kind of realizing through experience that, hey, we're not actually that different. You guys eat this, we eat that, but at the end of the day, we're both killing demons, right?
There's a bit more of a mutual respect now because of that just on a kind of larger level. So there's less border since the Demon War, there haven't really been any major kind of fights between the two nations. Maybe before that, it was a case of like every 5 to 10 years there was, it was kicking off a certain amount, in varying scales,
So somebody somewhere along the border gets their knickers in a twist and decides that, hey, for the honor of our kingdom, we're now going to kick off a fight.
Yeah, we're going to march, even if it's just as much as like one person, one little barony on the border decided, I've had enough of those scheming Vallannans over the border. I'm going to take 500 of my men and we're going to invade Hogtrotter.
It does strike me as maybe a Charlotte would be, given what we've been saying, like they'd be the aggressors a lot of the time on that front. They'd be the ones taking offense at things, deciding that, well, this is an affront to our society. No, this will not stand. And even if the crown is telling me not to start a fight, I will cross that border and I will start a fight because it's my honor at stake. That kind of thinking would cause constant issues until, there's a saying, if they end up fighting alongside each other, they recognize like, hey, if we can learn to respect each other, we're going to be better off all round.
I can't help but feel the genuine parallels between world wars and the European Union when talking about this. Like Demon War, World War II, and then suddenly 75 years of peace sort of thing. But hey, it works as an analogy sort of thing.
It's a classic. I mean, that notion of the greater threat combining peoples and getting people to like push aside their conflicts, that's very popular subject matter. I mean, it's the core of Watchmen. Ultimately, that's what that story is all about. I can think of numerous bits of media where that's the idea.
Yeah,
and I think it plays into that thing of like, you've just got to have inherent human truth, and that's kind of an inherent human truth is the ebb and flow of these relationships, the way that we react to it.
Yeah, like we all had to fight.
Of course, 2 generations later, you can have a big fight because some grandkid hasn't learned the past properly and has got some idea about the glory of war or something. That's
definitely going to happen. I mean, I think I'm going to adjust at some point some of the. I mean, we already haven't got all the settlements in there, but I've kind of noticed I've already got on the Vallanna side of the border a settlement called Or2, which is very much written in. That's kind of it's sort of got a French sort of vibe to it, so there maybe was a bit of border movement going on here and there. That would take a little bit of a deeper thought. I think I need to kind of go in and maybe plot out like when the big, because I would assume there was we could probably say there was probably a big war at some point between the two, not just little border skirmishes.
The kind of thing where it's perhaps border skirmishes building up to the point where they have a big war, and then partway through this war, for however long it's going on, that's when the Demon War kicks in, and they have a short, sharp shock of sorts. Perhaps you could have it where, I mean, it depends on. Perhaps you wouldn't want this necessarily, but my mind goes to something where it would be like, okay, you've got like a major battle occurring between Vallanna and Ashala, and wherever they are, it's close enough to the Demon War that some sort of demon influence or the demons just end up in the fight with them. And they only realize partway through the battle that they're not just fighting each other, and that they're kind of being slowly taken by the demons. And that as they see each other fall, the humans recognize a joint enemy. And during that battle, perhaps it could have been that you had some leadership, some major generals witnessing this happening and recognizing, like, as soon as those demons rolled up, we all started dying.
That's an interesting. I was thinking maybe that the big war between the two countries was sort of over and done with, like, well before. So we were still kind of in the age of like border skirmishes, but it could be that, like you say, there was something of a skirmish going on. Maybe perhaps one or the other, but it could be either Vallanna or Ashala. The generals had been under the influence of the demons or something to even kind of sort of put that little sort of wedge in there of, like, there already was something worse going on with the Demon War, but because, whether it was due to like a cult of the demon worshippers or whatever, but they had some kind of hand in kicking off this sort of little, well, maybe not even little, but this sort of side skirmish type thing, which ended in, like, as you say, maybe the demon, it was a bit of a tactical mistake, the actual demons themselves revealing themselves, thinking like, right, we've got all these people in one spot fighting each other, we can take out a good portion of the, the humans as it is, and that went the wrong way for them, because they the humans or it's not just humans, but you know what I mean, kind of realised, wait, hold on, who are these who are these demons? You know, we should be fighting them sort of like together. So maybe that backfired on them, sort of thing. They were trying to...
I like that idea of influence of some sort. I mean, in terms of the reason for the demon war occurring, ultimately, is it fair to say that like demons just don't like the humanoid races, let's say? It's hard to think of the blanket term for
I have actually
the non-demons, as it were, but the elves, the dwarves, all the rest.
I have actually got a fair amount of backstory for the demon war written, but there is it's actually in there as an article as well. I won't dictate it to you now or anything, but I mean, basically the war was supposed to have happened because a sort of archdemon managed to sort of force his way through from one of the lower planes through the kind of the inept, naive actions of an untrained magic user.
That really works then, because I was thinking in terms of like, okay, so this demon, his agenda is to, well, he ultimately is going to try and kill a lot of people and so foment arguments and what have you between people. So what you were saying about like you could have a cult that is following his orders to some extent.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've got all this kind of
side. You could have an element of that where, with this war we're talking about, you would have had potentially a general or two on each side is under the influence in some way, shape, or form, and has been convinced that, in some way, undermining the other generals around them on their side, that would help them. You could have it where both sides, in some way, shape, or form, recognize that there is a plot within their ranks. They initially point the finger at each other, but then something comes to light where both sides find out that this cult is effectively in both of their camps, and that the cult is the true enemy. And in recognizing this, they can then actually weed out the bad actors and then point and go, right, we've been fooled. We shouldn't have been fighting each other in the first place. This is silly. Let's combine forces. Again, it's all of these things I think can exist at the same time. It's sort of like it's plotting out the sequence of events. I mean, obviously we're talking in very nebulous terms, and it doesn't have to be hammered down right now. But it is that thing of like the sequence of events of like trust, loss of trust, the gaining of information in order to sort of gain a clearer picture of what's actually happening, and then the reunification of those disparate nations to fight the greater enemy. Yeah, I like it as a general.
Yeah, I mean, I've already kind of... Yeah. I can always go back and adjust what I've already written, but I've already kind of got it that, like, this, as I say, this demon kind of forced his way through and began to attract followers, you know, of mortal followers, because the more they worshipped, the easier it was for him to bring other demons through to fight. But I've already kind of got it written that as the cult grew, it kind of like, it didn't really have any, you know, it didn't stick to just Vallanna. It kind of spread among the cities and towns and stuff in secret, and it's sort of attracted individuals of power. We can always, I mean, it makes sense really that they would, as we said, have some kind of way to sort of influence as well. So maybe even the commanders themselves weren't under the direct control, but maybe the second in command who had been promised, like, look, you'll be in charge if, you know, you'll be safe during this. Just get your boss to take your men there and stuff like, you know, there's little subtle influences here and there.
Yeah. I was thinking in terms of like maybe one or two at the highest levels on each side, where it's the kind of thing where it's like a high-ranking general can give an order and say, these troops go here now. And if anybody turns around and goes, why? They say, I don't need to tell you that. I know why. I'm the general. You do it.
Need to know basis.
And that's the kind of, position of power that just allows that kind of influence to become corrupted, and lack of accountability is ultimately the thing that will drive that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I'll link you to the Demon War article that I've written already at some point, because you can take a look. That's not really what we're doing today, but yeah. But yes, to bring it back then, I like the idea that there's sort of that the Demon War was kind of a little bit of a, once it was over, a bit of a sort of peacemaking event between the two nations, really. It's
I could see that at that point maybe they'd have a brief period of like cultural exchange festivals and stuff before slowly but surely they kind of get bored of actually doing other people's cultural stuff and they just return to trading again. And occasionally maybe once a year a handful of people go to each other's villages and remember what they used to do in that one good summer when the fight was over. But beyond that they would sort of fade back away and go back to normalcy.
Because I mean, humanity being humanity, I'm sure there was a fair share of in the wake and even during the war, there's a fair share of genetic material swapped between the two nations. We'll leave it at that, I think. With that, but it's I like that kind of vibe there. That it's sort of they sort of were once maybe a little bit at each other's throats, but because of this horrific event, they're now sort of. Maybe not in an alliance still, but they're sort of declared as, in civilization terms, they're declared as friends, that sort of thing. Like you say, a little bit of a skirmish here and there, but generally nothing on a governmental scale, sort of thing. Should we move on and look at, because we've got quite a few other ones. Obviously, none of them as fleshed out as Ashala, but I think just to take a look at some of the other smaller other nations surrounding. The one I want to look at first is I kind of had this cool idea. I say cool idea. I totally sort of almost ripped off the Kingdom of Lancre from Discworld. But
we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. There's nothing new in the world.
But I thought it would be fun to kind of have like a quite small nation just sort of tucked away, kind of surrounded by mountains. So just south of the Icebind Mountains to the east of Ashala is a small country called... again, all of these names can be changed. This is just like what my brain spat out at the time. The Kingdom of Aphalia, which, again, I probably should Google all these names to make sure they don't mean something awful in some other language.
That just turns out it's a brand of spring water from Nairobi or something.
As we already discovered, there's a lot of wine companies called Vallanna. I don't want this to turn out to be some kind of like brony fanfic or something. Oh no, it's okay. No, we're gonna need to definitely gonna need to rename that.
Why? What is it? What have you found?
It seems to be. I don't want to click on that because it's all a lot of porn sites.
Oh, you've got me needing to Google this now. This is you've. Oh yeah.
We'll come up with another name, I think.
Well, okay. That's an interesting search. Yeah. Kids, don't look on Google for that one.
Don't look on Google for that one.
Adults with curiosity, look on Google for that one, and then perhaps not click the links. I'm joining you on that one because.
I'm not clicking any of that.
Yeah,
doesn't look good.
For full disclosure, these are adult websites, but they're of the brand and sort that you would not click on, even if you were looking for such things. Because, they look very dodgy.
Yeah, maybe we'll rename that one. But
I'll try not to have the dodginess of that influence my thoughts on what the culture of this place could be.
Well, based on the the Shadowrun game you ran for us, I know that's definitely an option.
I've got a level of seediness about me. I'll be honest. I can go there. But...
we'll do another. I'll come up with another name for that, and we'll call it something else. But basically, I had this idea. It's maybe only 40-50 miles across, if that. Just kind of tucked away in between the big mountain range and like a smaller range. And it's kind of, as you pointed out, we were looking at the map before we started recording. It's kind of quite well defended by natural features. So I thought it would maybe be a little bit sort of insular in that, like, they're quite confident that they're not going to come under any attack, really, that they can't, fend off. And they're only little anyway, so who would want to really go for them? So they're maybe a little bit kind of, maybe a little bit of complacency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see them being quite a relaxed place. It'd be the kind of place culturally where you wouldn't necessarily have a need for military build-up at any point, so perhaps it could be a little bit more scholarly there. Or at the very least, just not like, you wouldn't have conscription necessarily. You'd have people that want to be soldiers, and they're the ones that
because it's so small as well. There's not really, there's not really enough people maybe living there to have like a big standing army or anything. There's probably a few forts, like, just on like the key the key points, but they're sort of, like I say, maybe confident in their ability to defend themselves, and as a result, everybody else who isn't involved in that is free to kind of pursue other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, as we were saying again just before we were recording, I was looking at this and seeing, right, we've got the mountains to the north and to the south to some extent. That's the natural protection alongside the river's border there, and the settlement to the east, perhaps that would be quite, by the looks of things, like very safe, basically. Like you just wouldn't really have armies crossing the river to get to them necessarily.
No.
And as such, that would be perhaps I don't know, you would use it as an early warning of sorts, that you could have a man ride on a horse. If he could see something approaching from the other side of the river, he could jump on a horse, ride to the major settlement to the west, which could perhaps be like, that could be a historical fort or something. That's the defensible position of the region, because as we were saying, like, if you look at the lay of the land, you'd kind of have to come from the west to have any chance of striking into that place. And as a result, that would be the logical place for a historical fort to exist. And that could be like, we don't have many soldiers here, but we've got huge walls and these parapets where we'll just be pouring boiling oil on you before you can get through. So
I'm thinking,
come on down if you want to fight. that kind of thing would be the attitude, perhaps.
I'm thinking in the west, if you're looking, I don't know how zoomed in you are on the map.
All the way
in the sort of southwest corner where the mountain is. You go up one square, I'm thinking that's where the fort's going to be, kind of on the border, and that's kind of a major stronghold. And like that, like you say, the main dot in the middle is kind of the capital, which I didn't get around to put the yellow dot in. It's an unfinished map; it's always going to be unfinished, and obviously we're going to have to rename it anyway. So. I really should Google these things before I upload them.
I'm fascinated now to try and Google these other ones and be like, oh my god, what do these words mean? You just put 4 syllables together and suddenly you've got something where it's like, oh wow, I'm in a deep rabbit hole in Google right now. This is weirdness.
It's sounding vaguely, vaguely fancy. Like, that'll be fine. Okay, apparently Ashala is the capital city of the planet Bajor, so I think we're fine there.
That must have been somewhere in the back of your mind.
Somewhere in the back of my mind. I've watched a lot of Deep Space Nine, so I've pulled that from somewhere. God, okay, well, as we get to each of these, we'll Google them. But that's fine. But yeah, other than that, though, I haven't really got much of an idea of a vibe for Ophalia. Only that I kind of in my head based it on, I don't know if you've read much Discworld.
No, the Discworld was a big one for me growing up. I've got a whole bunch of them on my shelf.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I kind of had like Lancray in mind for that. Maybe it's probably a little bit less mountainous than Lancray's in the books. If I'd have, I would have moved it up actually to be in the mountain range if that was really, that. But I wanted it to have some fields and things, and it's got to have people have to be able to make a life there for there to be settlements. So
for sure, have some arable land. I quite like the idea that because it's quite a place that could have culturally been quite insular for a long time. Again, it's hard not to be inspired directly, and I'm not thinking that this would be the case in terms of direct character interaction. But the mood that comes from the French guy in the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the one that slaps his helmet and blows raspberries at them and stuff. The attitude for the people living within the kingdom would be kind of like, yeah, you can come here if you want, but we're not going to indulge your rubbish at all. In fact, we're going to make an open mockery of anything that you want to try and come here and talk about. Your culture is nothing to us because, hey, we aren't changing for anybody. We will be sat here doing what we're doing for the rest of time as far as we're concerned. And you guys will have your fights. We'll just sit in the middle of it and we'll go to you when you roll up and ask us to join your fight or whatever.
Like they will begrudgingly trade for goods with the neighbors, but they never seem to be happy about it, and they're not very welcoming to visitors, should we say?
I like the idea that they could be quite sort of like, I don't know, full of themselves, like that they consider their cultural achievements and the lasting nature of their culture and this all that kind of stuff to be a massive achievement compared to every other nation. We may be a small nation, but we are ourselves. We will never change. That kind of like, they're almost extreme patriots of a sort, but in that way where they don't even know what's going on outside. They're just so insular and so sure of themselves that they don't care at all.
Why would they need to know? That's happening over there. We're fine here in our giant castle, sort of thing.
We've got land to grow things on. We're defended. We don't need to go anywhere. The end. Like
exactly.
that would breed that kind of like. It's a kind of like aggressive complacency, I guess.
That's the kind of the national conscious thought is like, why would we want to go anywhere else? This is the best place. You know,
that place is wonderful.
Look, we got a lake. We got a road that goes 50 miles.
You look north, you see mountains. You look south, you can see mountains and some fields. We've got everything.
I have 3 goats. I'm good to go. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll come up with another name for that isn't something horrific. And I will amend the map very quickly, I think.
I'm morbidly curious to know what that word means and why that's got some adult connotation.
I don't want to click on it.
Yeah, I need to see some source that isn't actually those websites. I'm going to have to go looking for the definition of the word or something. Do Google language search to see if it's just a weird translation or something.
Maybe, or whether it's a name.
Either way, let's move on.
Yeah. So moving. Okay. So we're moving slightly further to the south east, directly southeast. Now I've called this one Sarvea, which I'm now going to Google.
I'm joining you on that. I'm curious.
It is a town in Finland. Okay, so I think we're probably okay.
If you put a T on the end of it, it's a village in Iran. Apparently,
so that does change the pronunciation, though.
It does.
Either way,
for some reason, Google auto-corrected and put a T on the end of mine, so I was like, "Oh, fair enough. I guess it's."
I think we'll stick with Sarvea for that because it's not throwing up anything immediately horrific on Google. Again, in just terms of general vibe here, I was thinking it's basically more like Spain. Maybe it's a bit more of a kind of whereas like the governments in like Ashala and Vallanna sort of monarchies. This is more of like a sort of, I don't know, what's the word? Theocracy sort of deal. Like the church holds a lot of power here. There might be like a nominal sort of council of, high council of the country, but they really just do what the church says, sort of thing.
How far gone are we talking, and what? I mean, if we're talking about direct inspiration from Spain, how close to Inquisition times are we? Because
I don't think we're quite there.
That's what the most crazy interest in intrigue can come in terms of like. Again, it's another one of those things that a lot of fantasy settings take a massive amount of inspiration from. Is the religious inquisitor, the fervent believer that is out on their religious quest and will self-flagellate and will proselytize and will go around with a gang of people dispensing quote-unquote justice to the non-believers.
Well, this is a question, isn't it? How far do we want to take it with this one? Do we want it to be mostly a peaceful land, or do we want it to be a place where there's something of an inquisition going on? Or is it currently, because remember, we're on like a timeline here, is that maybe something that 5-10 years down the road is going to kick off? Is it maybe fermenting as like, it once was a bit more of a kind of open-minded, slightly more liberal sort of looking place, but the church is rising in power, and give it 5-10 years, it will start being a bit more of like a sort of, there's Inquisition people going around burning witches at the stake, literal witches, in this setting.
The lay of the land would, it would lead me to think that you would perhaps have a little bit more liberal living on the west side of things, where life is perhaps more comfortable, and you would still have the foundations of the religious sect could perhaps come from that region. That's where it started, and life over to the east, where you can see the like green and lushness is falling away the further east you get. Perhaps that would be where the religion of this place could have become harder because of the necessity of like, we have to start enforcing ways of life. And historically speaking, religion's really served as a kind of social control. Don't eat pork because right now pork is diseased and that means we've all got a problem. Don't do this, do that. Follow these rules because that's what's going to get you through life. and that would be where an Inquisitus type hardline element could build up over time. That perhaps that settlement into the southeast, the one furthest southeast, perhaps that could be a stronghold of sorts where a few centuries passed, perhaps things were a little bit easier there. The lushness of the land was better, and that you could have an easier life. But over time, things have gotten harder, and that in order to cope with this, the society's gotten stricter. The religious side of things has, in turn, kind of ramped up its strictness, and it could be getting to a point where now things are starting to overflow into going too far, being too heavy-handed, and a sect that is born out of this one area could kind of explode and take over the slightly weaker liberal side of that religious sect, and then spread out towards the west, and then eventually,
more hardline, sort of,
given maybe 100 years or something for this influence to spread, a couple of generations of inquisitors moving slowly across the country and having their influence felt, that eventually you could get to this point of that's where the authoritarian surveyor becomes a thing. But in this era, perhaps it could be that the roots are there in that eastern settlement, but it's not started to spread yet. You could have
the western side is still a bit more, culturally is a little bit closer to the other nations we've talked about, like Ashala and Vallanna, because as you say, they've got green fields, they've got forests, they've got it quite good.
I could see it where you could have a scenario where perhaps you have the stronghold for the religion would be somewhere in that more lush area, like I said, and you could have the head priest of that eastern settlement where life is hard. He travels back to the main capital to see how life is there, to report back to the High Lord or whoever the head of religion is there, and he sees the ease of life, and he sees what he considers to be decadence, and decides that his voice should be the one leading this place, goes back to his zealots back at his stronghold and says, the religion is falling, we must take control. And then you would have him kind of sending out groups of people to be like, okay, this settlement, that settlement, and that settlement.
There
the priests in charge of those guys, they are heretics, we must destroy them, supplant them, and you will take my word to these places and use your might to make right. And then that would, spread out slowly but surely until, we're talking about the span of perhaps a century or even two. It would get to a point, I would think, where if they maintained power, a group like that would draw the ire of another nation.
For sure.
It's a funny one to think that with what we've said about the kingdom that will be renamed quite soon, as I will refer to it right now.
Well, they would maybe be in an easy, well, not easy, but they would be a natural first target.
Exactly, and that you would have it where you've got this long established history in that country where the religious police roll up on their doorstep and say, you're heretics, and they go away, you can't come in, we're not listening to what you're saying, you come here 100 times and we always listen to your rubbish and shoo you off. But this time the religious guys are like, no, guys, we're not actually leaving this time. It's time for a war.
And
then you could have it where that kingdom, that small kingdom, suddenly has to race across the northern border to try and find an ally and just be like, guys, you remember how we've always been a really strong kind of thing? We never changed, right? That's a good thing, right? You guys want to save us, right?
Remember how we did all that banking and financial services work for you?
Fuck you, Switzerland.
No, I like that.
It would be very much that idea of at that point, perhaps they would be sniveling and kind of not wanting to admit that they really need help, but really needing some help. Because these religious guys just will not stop, and there's no amount of talking that will stop them because they believe that there is a god on their side, and there might even be, for all we know. In this,
well, there probably is. We haven't really decided which one there is going to be. I have now got a full pantheon. We don't have to decide this now. This is just a sort of vague.
I need to sit and do some reading. You've done a lot more writing than I've gotten to.
Yes, I've sort of gone a little bit ahead, but I don't know. We'll have a think on that, but
I do like that as an idea, though. Is there's a kind of I don't know,
it's like a
critical
powder keg,
religious fervor that will eventually cause a problem.
But I also like the idea that they're very closely. They're rapidly approaching the kind of powder keg sort of moment. It's maybe only a decade away before things start sort of really kind of a bit of a wave of, the kind of self-appointed cleansing inquisitors or whatever really start exerting their power and declaring the Western states need their ministrations and such.
It might start out where like you'd have the rumbles of rumors of traders traveling down to that settlement in the southeast and coming back with stories of like, when you go to that place, you don't take a foot out of line.
Yeah, maybe that's the state of it.
You bow to the people and you do your religious things and you make sure it's seen that you're doing this. And then perhaps they come home and they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm back in the capital. Yeah. It's so much more relaxed here. And it's that kind of talk again that would build up that resentment, because the same conversation would go back the other way, where the traders from the east would perhaps go back home and be like, good God, you should see the way they live over there. It's disgusting. We strive and do what we must and follow the rules over here, and they're over there flaunting the rules. And that on all sides, you've got like the social side of things, the religious side of things, politics would spin out from there. It's that slow building up of resentment where there would almost be sort of two nations in terms of culture, but under one umbrella, and a civil war of sorts would be bred out of that. But
so that's kind of the state of it at the moment, is that the rumors are flying like, okay, if you go there, make sure I know you're a follower of this god, hide your symbols. I know that's against your thing, but trust me, you don't want the trouble, that's kind of the state of it now, sort of thing. So 5-10 years down the line, that's when things are really going to start being a little bit tricky. The day when that high lord or whatever, the high priest comes home and he's like, right, I've seen the disgusting things they do, I'm drawing a line today. That would be the kind of thing where it's like, oh, the trader that's at the gate that day that didn't cover up his symbols, he got killed. And the day before that, there was a guy that they kind of slapped on the wrist and told him no, but there's just a day where the powder keg explodes, and that's it. It's the line is drawn, and from that point onwards, that settlement in the east is kind of like spreading a terrible influence of sorts through that religion. Yeah. Okay, well, I think there's a lot. I feel like we could do a whole extra episode where we come up with. I mean, we could probably do a whole extra episode for each of these, nations. In the name of carrying on, let's take a look at their neighbours to the south, who I've called Scythia, which I'm going to Google.
That's close to a certain adult actress's name. I'll be real with you.
Everything is
off the top of my head. A lady with a specialty. I'm sure some listener out there knows what I'm talking about.
Look, we all know who you're talking about.
Hey, I think this is just, I don't know, this is rated T for teen. We're not in the everybody realm right here as far as ESRB ratings go.
But Google isn't spitting out anything terrible. So, in fact, there's actually a World of Warcraft character called that. That is just somebody's World of Warcraft character. Okay.
That's all right.
Forget. That's fine. But no, that's okay. So we're going to keep that name because, it has a vaguely... And I know you've been playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It has a vaguely Greek vibe to it. And this was my Greek analog, Scythia. So in terms of like keeping things rolling along, I had the idea that it's basically a collection of city-states sort of thing. I didn't have any thought other than that, than like, I should put the one here that's kind of vaguely Greek, because I've also been playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. There's a lot of islands there. We can put.
I want to steer away from being like, let's make it Greek. Let's come up with something unique about this place then. So they're city-state.
Yeah.
What can make them...
Maybe each one.
What are the configurations of humanity that are possible?
Here's an idea then. Here's an idea. So we've got their neighbours to the north, Sarvea, who are on the on the beginnings of like a religious sort of revolution of sorts. Maybe each of the city-states here is sort of, they kind of model themselves after worship of one particular god each or something.
Yes, and they have their own pantheon compared to the other surrounding nations, and that could be the thing that sort of makes them distinct. And within that, you could have specializations.
Yes,
where if each settlement is particularly kind of devoted to a way of life to worship a particular god, you could have it where this is the city of learning, this is the city of agriculture, this is the city of warfare,
the traders, this is the warlike not warfare, but warriors, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So then you do end up with your Sparta analog and your Athens analog,
but perhaps within that they could be less at each other's necks, as it were. They simply recognise that, as far as their nation is concerned, that it is the correct and right way to do things. That each place should be specialised, and that we shouldn't try and individuals from each of these specialisations will have to travel from location to location, and we will have to work together because there has to be a unity within these things. But by having very focused specializations, they get further as far as they're concerned.
Yeah,
they can learn more through that focusing.
So I'm thinking the most sort of northwest city there is maybe mostly gods of trade, gods of agriculture and such. Good trade, good fortune, that kind of thing. That's sort of like their major things there, because they're so close to Ashala and they're on a river. I'm
looking at the lay of the land, and I'm just thinking in terms of that, the agriculture, perhaps, it could be that where they're connected by the river, you could have it where it would make sense to have the farmlands away from the border, because you need your breadbasket to be protected. So perhaps the settlement to the south and perhaps some of those islands there could be very fertile land, and that riverway up to that northern settlement, you could have that southern place, that's the specialized towards, like, this is the breadbasket of the nation. And then you have them travel their goods up that riverway up to the trading settlement. And you can see it's kind of right on the northern border there. But if you went from that trading settlement and followed the river around to the east, you'd be able to get over to the furthest eastern settlement.
Yeah.
Or one of the furthest eastern settlements, and then kind of that trade network would make sense, I suppose.
Yeah. No, like I say, I just like the idea of, like, they've all reached an equilibrium sort of thing. Each city is like, okay, this is the city of warriors, so there's like big temples to Tempus, and we've got Torm as the god of courage and stuff like that. This is, those who are dedicated to that sort of way of life go here, and they don't have any problems with the people who decide to be into book learning and such. It's just not for them, and that's not here, sort of thing.
It would strike me that it'd be the kind of place, I mean, similar to the Greeks and the Romans, where the gods would be described in terms of having relationships with each other, and the relationships between the gods would reflect the ways that the humans can get along with each other. That in the city of trade, perhaps, you have a stronghold, like there's a farmers guild, like there is a minor temple to the farming gods, because they have a relationship with the trading gods. This isn't their place, but they have a relationship, so there's a reason for there to be a temple there. And that could be the place where the decisions that, like, these settlements, how they interact would be in these temples. Decisions made by kind of religious organizers of sorts that would liaise with the traders and what have you. Ultimately, the religious leader, the trade god's religious leader, would be a trader, presumably. The god of war's representative would be the greatest general of the land.
Yeah, definitely.
And within that, you have a political structure, but it's framed within the god's influence.
So, like the sort of maybe council of the nation, rather than there being like a king, or maybe there is a king, but maybe the council of the nation is just the high priests of each of the sort of, once again, this is kind of another sort of theocracy type thing. But if the nation is such a sort of
I've got an idea. How do you like this? Right, okay. So you've got the idea of these nation states, and that at some point they did have their individual beliefs, and that was a cause for contention. That the specializations meant that the warlike guys were always trying to get at the scholars, the traders were always trying to rip off the farmers. That kind of thing was going on. And at some point, a great leader came to the front, an Alexander the Great type individual, but not in the sense that he was the jack of all trades. This was a ultimate diplomat of sorts. This was somebody that recognized that if each of these nation states within the grand nation of Scythia,
well, maybe his name was Say.
Yeah, and he traveled the land, going from place to place, speaking of the relationships between these gods and what they should be. and that in time his representation, or his kind of the way that the people came to see him, could have been the arbiter of another god, a god that they didn't know about yet, that was the unifier, the one that brought them all together, that was not necessarily the Zeus, not the one that birthed the rest of them, but the god that came in and saw what their brothers and sisters were doing and said, enough, we're brothers and sisters, we are a family, and that's what our nation should be. Yeah. And that story, on a kind of basic worker level, allows your soldier to understand why he shouldn't fight the scholar, allows your trader to understand why he shouldn't rip off the merchant, because they are together, and it's the people outside the borders that are not under their god's worship and what have you. They are the ones that they should be focusing that kind of aggression towards. And that would be a kind of an era of unification. I like it. A new god was crowned at that point after a fashion, or they represented that this individual, you are something.
Or unity as a whole, sort of, yeah. So he brought the nation. Yeah, I like that idea. Like you say, maybe that, yeah, which is in a sense kind of what happened sort of with Greece a little bit.
Well, that's it, and that's why Alexander the Great comes to mind. But I think removing the militaristic aspect makes it more interesting in this way of the power of his words was such that everybody around them recognized the value of it, and that there could be a kind of like the way that sector of religion has now come to be part of this area would be that all cities have a temple to that particular god, because all cities recognize that it is that god that unifies them. He's not above anybody else. He or she is not above anybody else, but that is the one that unifies them, so it has a place everywhere.
And here's the rub as well.
That would be like the arbiter of decisions and stuff. That group, that sect, as it were, would be, okay, we've got the merchants and the traders having an argument. That sect rolls in to be, hey, we're the peacemakers. We're going to find the middle ground for this. We're going to arbitrate this argument, and we're going to do it in such a way that we're all going to stay together at the end of this. No way will we have a fight, because we're here to keep the peace.
Here's the rub as well. Maybe even though all these other gods are real, maybe that one is made up.
Well, exactly. And then you've got that idea of, I mean, it depends again, within the realms of fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons, how you become a god is a question. And I've played a lot of games like this. Tyranny's one in particular that comes to mind, and Pillars of Eternity is another one where you have the opportunity by the end of all things to have kind of ascended by virtue of recognizing that taking steps towards certain types of power will ultimately place you into the realms of like godhood, that no human could ever touch you again once you've done these things. And that perhaps it was just a man to begin with, but there could be some kind of like this is up to you to some extent, but it could be that the belief breeds an actual creation of something. That
there's the thing as well,
an idea, but the power of that idea meant that the actual pantheon of the gods changed to some extent. A new god truly was born through the idea, but that depends on how you want to manage the way that religion works.
But there's the Elder Scrolls thing as well about Talos used to be a man.
That's it.
And I know you've been playing a lot of stuff. You've just started playing Skyrim again as well. So.
Oh yeah, no, it's in mind. But there's a concept called mantling in the Elder Scrolls, which is literally like and this is real deep lore stuff. But whole Lorcan copied the behavior of another historical figure, and in copying that behavior, and this is the idea on all of those stories, in fact, the Neverine, the Dragonborn, you're not necessarily that character at the start of the game, and you might never be that character, but if you follow the steps, you become that character.
Yeah.
And it's in following the steps that, simply by following the process of copying somebody else's behavior, you become akin to that person, and if you're copying a god's behavior, then you become a god.
Well, it's got really deep.
Well, yeah,
it makes sense. Yeah, sorry, just trying to lighten the mood a little. But yeah, no, I'm with you on that 100%. Yeah, just as a sort of, like you say, a unifying figure. Maybe it was this guy who he kind of, maybe he came up with it as a concept of like, oh no, we need to give these people something to believe in to bring them together. So he's kind of come up with this fake god, and then in doing so became the fake god himself.
Yeah,
to be a real god.
Well, not even necessarily the individual became it, but more that an avatar that truly represents the idea and the fervence of belief and the purity of other people's acceptance of that belief. would perhaps be the thing that would create that God. That I feel like I quite like the representation of gods in fiction to be something of like each one of them represents a inherent truth of nature. And the inherent truth of the message that this peacemaker had was something that is not apparent on the surface of nature, but that this individual gleaned it. And by gleaning that information, it's sort of like it changes the pantheon at that point. The umbrella of the gods, as it were, has to adjust and recognize the fact that there is space, and perhaps this thing always should have been in it. It's part of the nature of things, but now that a human has recognized this on their planet, or now that an individual, I keep saying human, but an elf, an orc, or whatever, a consciousness has gleaned this, so now it is part of the tapestry of everything.
Maybe it's sort of just a concept of like a deity or whatever of unity or something, or balance. Maybe balance is more.
Well, balance and unity. The oneness, the wholeness. There's like in all of these things, when you come to use words to describe godlike figures, you have to have lots of sort of like analogies and similes for what they represent, because you can't have like the god of farming. Well, farming's a pretty broad concept. I guess he's in charge of rain because that's part of the deal. Is he? Like, you get into the complexities of that, where I think that keeping it in the realms of balance and order and unification, that these are the things that this deity and this individual's ideas, that he espoused these ideas, the ideas became more powerful, they were spread through the consciousness of the people, and through that became part of the fabric of the society, and as such part of the fabric of the gods. And it's kind of like there's steps, there's an incremental thing, and it's ultimately like it's a messiah figure of sorts. It's hard not to think of a Jesus type thing where it's sort of like, well, he would have his disciples that he gives his strongest ideas to, and then they go out and espouse those ideas, and it's kind of like there's an echo from his initial kind of like, he sounds the gong, and then the echo reverberates around him slowly but surely until the whole place is resonating with the words, the thought.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of thinking, like I say, I'm on board with all of this. I'm wondering, I'm sort of going back and forth in my head whether having it being a kind of like a messiah figure would be better than like you say, an Alexander the Great type sort of thing, unifier. I think there's a lot of do we want to have it be, because then we've got a couple of very religious nations right next to each other, or do we want it to be one that is, this Sathia is, that is mainly, its main feature is that its cities are kind of dedicated to, gods of different flavors, but it was unified under someone who was not quite as, I don't know, not necessarily of the priesthood sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea that it would be a great figure that doesn't become a god. It is a human, and that his words and the way that he gets or got people to kind of actually buy into what he was saying was the fact that he truly lived by it. That when push came to shove, this was an individual who maintained his sort of piety, as I said, after a fashion. He never took power. He never wanted power. He was offered it by people when they recognized that his words meant something. And instead he said, no, you know what you're good at. I know what I'm good at. I will found an arbiters guild of sorts. And that I will serve this new god that I feel exists. And that it would be the argument of whether there actually are or aren't deities directly influencing the society, I feel could be one that's sort of plucked away, because the usefulness of the stories on a human level and the way that they would allow different sectors of society to interact with each other would be the ultimate thing. And that it doesn't matter whether or not he even knows that there's a god or not. Him saying this, perhaps as an individual, it's the kind of thing where within like historical religious thinking, there were religious scientists who had to acknowledge the fact that God existed within their text, but at the same time were working in such ways where it's like, deep down they really knew that they weren't actually believers. To think the things they thought, they were kind of trying to steer around it. And this would be a factor of like, maybe this guy knew that, look, everybody truly believes all this stuff about the gods and everything, and I've got to frame my ideas within what they can actually get on board with. So I'll tell them this is the idea of a deity. I'll tell them that this is a godly thing, that we should all be together. And whether he believed it or not was not the point. The power of the story was the important part. And that he stuck with that and never fell to temptation in terms of like, this was an individual that at some point would have been offered wealth and a comfortable life, and instead he continued to just go from settlement to settlement, making sure that rights were wronged and that different groups were actually starting to get along with each other and rooting out the seeds of dissent to make sure that the nation could actually work together as one unified but disparate kind of thing. Like that's the interesting thing that I think that we've come up with here, is that each city would have a very distinct feeling to it, but then you might walk into one quarter of it and feel like you'd gone to one of the other cities on the other side of the continent, because it's the quarter where the temple for that place is. And hey, they try and live life a little bit closer to what their hometown is like, but they also recognize they're in this place, so there's a weird mishmash. It's almost, you'd walk into Chinatown after a fashion and feel like, okay, so this is like the other side of the country, but it's here, and I can see elements of what's local here, but I can also see a hell of a lot of what's over there.
Yeah, I like that. I think it works. Obviously, there's a lot more we can flesh out with that. Everything, and again, as with all of these, we don't have place names. We don't have, we don't have a governing, how many characters, if that makes sense at this point.
And timescale for what we just said, like, this isn't necessarily contemporary to anything that's gone on.
No. I think I think in the case of this has been, they've been pretty much unified probably for several centuries at this point.
Yeah, I think that would make sense, and that would make sense for there to be these established guilds, a very cemented kind of way of life. And ultimately, that thing of having two nations with strong religious ideas right next to each other, in particular, Scythia, which would be very united were a war to come, versus Sarvea, where you might have it where the people in the West that had been living comfortable lives, where they've fallen under the thumb of these hardline religious people for maybe a generation or two, there's going to be some fermented kind of like resentment towards that's going to cause problems when the religious police say, hey, go and fight those people to the south. Maybe they go, hey, guys to the south, we don't actually believe what these religious guys say anymore. Can we start believing what you think now? Because you guys seem to have it figured out.
Yeah, no, I like that. There's definitely there's room there for potential future conflict and everything, and it's good. I like it. Should we move further east to Onus, which
indeed
I think actually is that works out well, as Onus is something that is one's duty or responsibility. So I'm thinking this is, I mean, you'd said again before we started recording, this is quite a hard land, and we had in mind the idea that this is something of a sort of autocratic kind of authoritarian sort of society. So I kind of had an idea that maybe this was a society of everyone here is a warrior, not necessarily a warrior, but everybody has to know how to fight. Everybody has to know how to protect themselves, just because of all of basically most of the geography of this nation is defined by its sort of being the kind of southern wash of the Auric wastes from up north. So it sees a lot
break in the mountains. Yeah, it's almost like the break in the mountains has allowed the wind to just slowly drag bits of the wastes down onto Onus.
Yeah, so maybe over the course of the last couple of thousand years, like Onus used to be this green, like the bottom green tip of it is still as the country used to completely be, and it's just slowly encroached further south. Every year there's a little bit less green. There's a little bit more weird, magic touched kind of dust, sort of, hard living, sort of hard to eke out an existence in that land.
Yeah, and that idea of an authoritarian rule where it's kind of like, look, if you are traveling in the desert, there are certain rules to the ways to do it, and all men and women within this society would be trained in such a way where, look, you'll die and you'll possibly kill everybody else if you don't follow these rules. So if we see anybody falling out of line, like, that will be knocked out of you when you're a kid.
Yeah. And as a
anybody
side
that makes it to adulthood is just in line with the way things are because they have to be.
And as a side effect of this culture, no, Sarvea is not in any rush to mess with them. We haven't really got anything so far for Ostelmark to the further east. But they just got a reputation, maybe, you know, internationally as like, oh, it's that warrior's from Onus. Oh crap, they must know what they're doing, sort of thing.
Yeah. If he's left the nation and if for some reason there's a mercenary from Onus around, then worry about him.
They're a sought after sort of, you know, the reputation is like, look, he'll get the job done. They're maybe not the most. I'm trying to think of the word. They're people, maybe a few words, sort of. Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, just the idea of like it's a hard land to live in, and to do so, like you say, there's a bit of maybe like a strongman ruler or something.
Yeah, it would be the kind of place that would have a very limited culture where you'd probably have the kind of like there'd be the apocryphal stories, things that set the standard of like you do this, you don't do that, and they would be very simple moralistic stories that are very simple to understand and never change, and that everybody knows the same stories. There's no reason for anybody to know anything different because these are the things that will help us, that are useful to making a child's mind understand what life there is going to be like for them. And in that, as soon as they get to adulthood, it's almost like, not necessarily religious, but like I've met people from far-flung cultures that have come to this country and have felt like everything is wrong here. And it's like, well, that's just because you do things the way that you do things over there, and I'd feel the same if I was over there. And Onus, I think, would be a place that kind of really breeds a strong version of that, where you'd probably have it's a similar kind of resentment that the religious police from that eastern area of Sarvea would have, where they would go to a slightly more comfortable place and look around them and just sort of turn their nose up at the way that people live and be like, "You're all soft. You would all die where I come from, so you're nothing to me." That would be the kind of like, it could be seen as arrogance, people from Onus having an arrogance about them, where really it's just that it's a necessary culture.
I'm thinking as well that there's not a lot of infighting because they don't have the, you know, this is the polar opposite of Ashala. There's no politicking at court. You know, any kind of slight is dealt with like an honor duel or something. You know, you have an argument, you would best be ready to die for that argument.
Yeah, it would strike me that the settlement that's on the river, that's furthest north, that place is kind of like, it's a place struggling. You've got the other settlement, like in the green pastures to the south, that would kind of be like, that's going to have to be the place that makes the food for the rest of them, or a lot of it. And this place to the north is going to be almost like a struggling, slowly dying location where everybody is eking out a hard life, and there is that sense of like, look, we can't change, and they're ignoring the fact that the world around them is no longer allowing them to kind of do things the way they did, perhaps, and that's going to lead to an explosion of anger and upset, and that perhaps at some point Onus's like soldier, their entire populace could decide, look, we're going to need to take another nation, and the southern region of Ostelmark, or maybe Sarvea at that point, could become a target for them in terms of just like, our land is dying. It's not our fault. We've tried our hardest. And now, because of our hardships, we're strong enough to take on everybody around us. So make space. That would be the kind of playing out, I would have thought, in terms of like the turn of the historical wheel, I guess. You have this point where they're eventually crushed by circumstance, and eventually base human nature rules out, and they go, look, we can fight. They can't. We're going to have to go and take stuff off of people that can't fight now.
I haven't actually really decided with those two islands just south of Onus. I think I'm actually in the map going to end up moving them out a little bit further into the bay. Because I'm not sure if they should be part of Onus, or whether I might move the left hand of the larger ones a little bit further further west, to be maybe, and sort of slightly southwest to be more kind of part of Sathia, if that makes sense.
I think it would make sense, yeah, because it just in terms of like having fairly large island land masses that the populace of Onus could just escape to.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't they have done this at this point?
We want to take that option
Aside
away
from maybe
from them.
there could be like a certain amount of like history in the region that they are clinging on to. That it's a sense of like, look, we hold on to this place because this is the birth of our culture, and to let go of this would be it would be the death of Onus or something. That would be the rhetoric thrown around.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't really got anything else in mind for Onus at this point. I kind of am not in a wrapping things up way, but we are kind of at the side of the map where it's like, okay, we've just got some vague concepts here.
Yeah, I don't feel that it needs to be more than that. I do like the idea that the wastes have kind of crept down from the north, and that whatever happened there, it's not truly over. The world isn't hasn't recovered from what's going on. But
they're not actually
the range of mountains.
They're not actually in the wastes, but the northern half of the country, it's like I've been reading a Chernobyl book recently, but it's kind of like the sort of magical corruption and stuff has blown south, if that makes sense. So they're not in the zone, they're not in the exclusion zone, but they're right next to it, and the prevailing winds are poisoning their land, sort of thing.
Have you ever played the Stalker video games?
I haven't. They're not actually. Yeah, I know they're sort of set in Chernobyl. They're actually based on a book that came out way before Chernobyl happened, though. Roadside Picnic. I've done a bit of reading on all of that stuff, and Stalker in particular is one where the setting for it and that notion of like, I like the idea of magical anomalies along those lines, where it would be, you walk into this area and guess what? Time has slowed way down, and you didn't feel it as you walked in, but the second you stepped out of that field, you looked around and it was nighttime. Or you walked into a room and you could feel every hair on your body burn off at once. Nothing but your hair, but now you're bald and you don't know why it happened. Well, that's a little bit of my.
You walked into a room where something was going on and you couldn't see what it was.
That's a little bit of my thought about what the wastes are kind of like. It's like this. I mean, we've talked about it before. It's this kind of like there's this sort of mutating kind of unpredictable kind of magical sort of infusion in the land, which has killed off all the life and everything from like a giant magical accident or something at some point or another has created the waste. The land used to be, as green as everywhere else, but now it's this kind of like blasted sort of unpredictable shifting sort of landscape that if you spend too long in it, it's going to change you.
Yes.
And it's sort of, you never know really what's going to happen in there, which is why, and there's these sort of mutated creatures, there's stuff that you've never seen before, and there's the reason why that during the Demon War, the Archdemon made his kind of headquarters, that's not the right word, but, in Orikheim in the center of it. Because, I don't know, something about his demonic nature made him immune to the mutating effects sort of thing. But just this idea of like, okay, so this is not a great place. Nobody should live here,
Yeah, it's kind of like just a very chaotic location.
Yeah, again, I'm trying not to rip off the Chaos Wastes from the original old Warhammer, old world sort of thing, but it's sort of like that to a degree. Like everything there's infusion of unpredictable magic. In D&D terms, wild magic throughout the whole area, and Onus being to the south of that, it's kind of is bearing the brunt of that sort of thing.
That again would lead into that idea of like them having very strict rules of behavior and what have you, where it's kind of like if you're going to be traveling out northwood,
don't drink the water from here.
Yeah, the further you go north, the more likely you are to run into something bizarre or that would shatter the mind of an unprepared individual, and that these people of Onus have had to steel themselves. And perhaps there could even be to the point of like, if you're going to be traveling to these northern realms, there are mantras and things to repeat to yourself as you're traveling to remind yourself who you are and where you come from, so that you never fall to the influences of the place. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like that. Let's move on to Ostelmark. I have no idea of this at all, other than maybe it's literally like an Eastern Vallanna. In terms of like, I've got no settlements on the map other than one dot I accidentally put on there. And this is one maybe to come back to when I have a larger map, I think.
I think this might be a fun one in terms of you could have a juxtaposition to onus to some extent where they aren't as hard line. Perhaps because more of the landmass is still all right, and perhaps you could have like the capital of that location far to the south, away from where the degradation of the land is occurring. And there's a complacency perhaps in Ostelmark. There's a sense of, oh, yeah, the nature changes. The sand's coming in from the north, but it'll stop eventually. We'll be all right.
Well, the thing as well with Ostelmark is that I've had to crop my map to hit the file size limit for World Anvil, and even the full map wasn't the full size of what I had. I've actually got a separate smaller map showing more like of global geography. Ostelmark is actually quite a large country, most of which is green, and
so that would play into that.
It goes quite a way further to the east, and then it also has the eastern coast of the continent on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it would strike me that perhaps they're the kind of nation, if they're like a bit like Vallanna, then it's kind of like, I don't know, fairly typical kind of agrarian lifestyle.
Yeah, I know perhaps it's a bit of a cop-out because we've already got that, but I mean...
No, but I think that these things, you can only have so many varieties, and it has to make sense next to each other, and the land itself has to kind of tell the story of what's possible there. And I do think that you could have it where that complacency, that comfortability comes from like, yeah, we're all still feeding each other. Like, we didn't lose major settlements to the north.
They've got enough space to the east to still have the comfortable life, whereas Onus is kind of penned in between them and Sarvea and is still getting the runoff from the wastes. Whereas Ostelmark, okay, they've got enough room that they can just all but abandon that bit on their western frontier that is starting to feel the wastes because they got plenty of room. They got,
I would think in terms of the politicking and what have you between Onus and Ostelmark, you would have it where, because Ostelmark is almost lackadaisical to some extent from Onus's perspective, that would create tension. Ostelmark would perhaps hold out a hand of friendship and say, hey, we'll give you food where you can come and live on our land if you like. And the people of Onus would be like, you should be trying to fight back the wastes encroaching on your land. You guys aren't doing enough. You're not helping us. We're fighting a hard fight over here. We're trying to do what we can. And you guys are just sitting back letting it happen. And that could be a point of contention that eventually, as we were saying with Onus, where given time for it to get bad enough for them to eventually have to cede and give up on their land, perhaps Ostelmark at that point would become the location they set sights on because they go, well, historically, we don't feel like they did anything when this started.
They wasted this land that they had, so now we will take it.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Yeah, I like that.
That's where my mind's going on that.
Again, I think Ostelmark, eventually I'll figure out a way of getting a larger, even if it's a case of doing a second map that is, you can't zoom in quite as far.
How's this, right? So just in terms of like, this is a bit of a timescale thing, but Ostelmark continues to degrade as Onus gets to the point where it is finally like they're having to just leave the land there, or at least they're having to not have major settlements and perhaps become just roving bands of sort of like the traveling caravans of the desert kind of thing, like living like that. As Ostelmark has gone that way, I can see there's that small landmass that's kind of like very thinly connected, and that there's a settlement on it. That would perhaps become the last holdout of Ostelmark, and that when the wastes have crept into those northern areas of Ostelmark a little bit further, the hardened people of Onus can survive in that land. They're ready for that. They can go in and take over with their caravans and still live a life to some extent. And the remaining culture and the kind of the last part of Ostelmark would become those small islands and that small little bit that's hanging off the bottom of the landmass there, because they'd have almost been forced into it. That ultimately there was no war, perhaps, that there wouldn't be a big fight for Onus to take the landmass of Ostelmark, but Ostelmark would kind of just cede by moving away. They would go as far south slowly but surely as they could, as those complacent, comfortable living people start recognizing life's getting harder. They just go, oh, well, my brother down in the south still got it comfortable. So everybody goes south at the same time, kind of. And then you've got a major huddling of the masses on a very small part of decent land with no ability to kind of go north or go anywhere after that. That would be a very interesting kind of, I don't know, it's like a crucible of sorts, because then you've got a cultural distillation. You've got a lot of people in a very small place forced to do that. You've got a different culture coming in from the north. again, you've got these kind of expansions and retractions of ideas that.
I do like that. I think I haven't really made it quite clear how much further east Ostelmark goes. I'm just going to... Obviously, this is not going to be visible to our listeners.
True, yeah. If there's that much more of the landmass, perhaps it would just be the Western Ostelmark would be the part that's like going through that process to some extent.
Yeah, I'm just going to... again, this is... I know this isn't great for listeners, but I'm just going to send Eden a cropped version showing the whole continent. It doesn't have all the textures on it.
Okay, yeah.
But Ostelmark, basically, if you that whole bit, you can see where the mountains are. You draw basically a horizontal line across. You got Rivard in the north, and then the whole of that other eastern bit is Ostelmark.
Okay. So yeah, perhaps it would just be Western Ostelmark that falls, and that you would have the border of Ostelmark become divided, where you have like a very that small bit, that island chain and the archipelago that's hanging off the end. That would be like the north of that is now Onus.
Yeah,
but that area is still considered
jumps.
to be Ostelmark, and that they rely entirely on naval trade with the other aspects of Ostelmark at that point.
Yeah, they've been cut off, but they they refuse to give in. They are the Gibraltar of.
Yeah, and I wouldn't set it up as like Onus wouldn't be aggressive towards trying to take that part of the land, but it would just be that like. Nobody from Ostelmark wants to go north into the roughed up area anymore. They've kind of just shrugged and gone, all right, fine.
Just taken it.
Yeah. They recognise that the quality of the land is like Onus's land. That it's sort of like the way that commoners would talk about it would be like the land itself decided that it was part of Onus. And that's why they decided, like, the land told us we weren't welcome anymore. We've gone to the greener pastures of the south. Yeah. They can have the place that the world has taken from us.
Yeah. Well, okay, the last one I just want to touch on again, because this is another one that's been around for a while that we've sort of mentioned before but haven't done much with, is Rivard. Again, it's not shown on this map because I can't go that far east because of the file size limit, but this is another one where it's only it is only this western section that's desert, because again, it's kind of the spilling over of the wastes. And this I had in mind... in general, that let me just find the page because I had started writing one. The kind of vibe of it is more of a kind of rather than it being a what's the word, kind of kingdom or theocracy, it was more like a kind of merchant republic sort of thing where it's sort of, you know, there's a lot of kind of free trading and that, and a lot of kind of mercenary forces rather than a standing army and that, and it's just kind of, it takes up a lot of room. They've managed to take a lot of land and that, and they they're sort of a little bit of an enigma because they're blocked off by the huge lands of the wastes kind of thing. But they're very kind of sort of shrewd traders and that, and they have a lot of resources at their command. That's basically all I've got in mind, really. At the moment. I
like that in terms of where we'd previously done one of the world building things, and we talked about Riftview and the reason for that settlement to exist, that it's on the edge of the wastes, that there are perhaps minerals and things there that you can't get elsewhere, and that as a result, it's not really like a settlement that people live in. It's a place to go and work and earn a living and then get the hell away from and live your life elsewhere if you survive it at all. That perhaps this could be like a more codified, structured version of that, where it's an entire culture built around that in this area.
Yeah. To
some extent, where you could have it where they are in the wastes to some extent. These are locations that could potentially have resources that are exclusive to them. My mind goes to, and again, it's real world analogy, but the Silk Road and spice trade, that you can have it where perhaps certain spices only grow in the, like, I'm trying to look, is it a settlement called Arwa? Am I saying that?
Could be.
It's hard to read some of these.
I think, I think Arva. I don't know. I was kind of writing with vaguely ancient Egyptian names for what I did put in Rivard. That was a long time ago. I put those on the map. I don't remember what I had in mind for any of them.
But I just see that little area with those rivers and what have you, that could be a spice growing region. That there's just enough water that some plant life can thrive. It will be those kinds of things that grow out in deserts like spices. And the roads connecting these locations to get out to Kumsa at the north, that could perhaps be the trading port, or maybe Sharsa. Oh, Kuzma, sorry.
Sorry, it's as you said, Kumsa, and I just started giggling.
I got those adult websites in mind. I'm very sorry, ladies and gents. Or Sharsa, either and whichever one would have the, or perhaps even both, that they could be operating as major trading hubs. That the inland areas are kind of like not necessarily slave-run places, although potentially, given the hardship of life there, but the anything inland is a service to the merchants that live on the coast that then go and sell the goods so that they can then bring back the necessary things to survive this location.
Yeah, and again, there's a large, I mean, because you can sort of see on that one I sent you in a private message, there is a large portion of the land there of Ravad that is green. Let me just bring up, because I'm pretty sure I have an uncropped version of the full map that we're using. It's still not going to show the whole thing, I don't think, but it's been a while. Okay, that is a bit bigger, actually. You can sort of, let me just find it. Expansion. Sorry, this is not great listening, I do apologise, folks, but...
I'd whistle some sort of intermission tune right now, but I'm probably tuneless enough that would be a torture rather than a entertainment.
Okay, I was about to send you this JPEG, but it's 42 megabytes, so forget that.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it does have a fair amount of greenlands to the east as well. God, I'm so annoyed I couldn't upload this full map. Basically, this map is basically a third big again to the east as the one that's online. I'll figure out a way of getting that on there, but yeah.
Well, in terms of social structure, then, like if there is like a comfortable life to the east, I mean, Ed, this is, you tell me what you think. I'm thinking that perhaps these could be slightly more ethically run locations, that they're trying not to have slave labor. They're not running it like it's actually like.
So you're thinking this is volunteer, like this is the hard work. People go out here because there's a fortune to be made out here.
Yeah, it's almost like this is literally the Wild West of Ravad.
Yeah,
that you go out there to make your money mining or whatever, raising spices if you've got the specialization or whatever, but that you make your money and perhaps you become part of a strong enough merchant or whatever that you make your life there, but that a majority of people would be, again, the same as that settlement back in Vallanna, that you would come and go, that this is not a place to live, but a place to earn, effectively, that there's resource here and little else.
Yes, definitely.
At least in this part that we can see on the map right now.
But no, I like that idea. And maybe like as a result of the sort of the trading, the little bit of trading, because like I say, they've got quite a lot of leverage. They've got a lot of resources at their control. Maybe the people to the west in Vallanna and such have a bit of a skewed view of what they're like. They're not actually sure. Like they think they're sort of a hard living, hard bargaining sort of people. But then to the east, there is like a lot of sort of comfortable living and stuff. But
it's the kind of thing where like you wouldn't need to, like, if you were living in the comfortable part of Ravad or even Ostelmark, looking at the map now, because as you said, there's a large amount of landmass to the east. If you're living over in that far east location, there's just no reason to have ever visited or had like cause to trade with Vallanna or any of those other places. No. And as you say, if somebody one of the traders that sailed from this western part of Ravad ends up in Vallanna, they might turn up with like a very dusty looking boat and looking a bit like parched and what have you, and give the impression that, it must be a hard place to live. But that's that part of Ravad.
Yeah.
And those are the only people that ever leave the place in terms of getting that far east. That far west. So it would give a weird interpretation of things.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to expand on that. I think maybe at a later date, because we are we've been going for an hour and 40 on this. So yeah,
it's come easy. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is good. I think we will call it there. I think on that for this. That is because we've got a lot to work on there. I think we in at the very least, I've got to come up with a new name for the Kingdom of Athalia. So there's that to be done. But yeah, I feel like countries in there as big as Ostermark and Rivard, we may never get there with the actual D&D, but I feel like they're big enough that we can basically probably dedicate a whole world building episode to them at some point in the future if we ever get around to that. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So normally on these world building ones, I say pitch me something, but we've done quite a lot of pitching today.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. My brain just went into spasm for a second. It was like, oh, you're going to take the reins off and now be like, go wild, anything you want. It's like, oh, I've been using this map to inform just about everything that I've thought so far. Like,
don't worry about that with this one. I think we'll. But yeah, no. So thanks for joining me for this. I think the other option we were going to do, I will a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here. It is currently the World Anvil summer camp event, and last year we did a couple of summer camp world building episodes. I think we are maybe going to probably do one of them in a couple of weeks' time. Because it'd be good to get back and take a look at some of those prompts, because we had fun doing that last time. I know on date of recording this, there are a few of them up already on World Anvil, but we really wanted to just, because I've been kind of, for a while, kind of itching to take a look at these new countries and stuff, so I think we're going to save those for next time. But yeah, so that's kind of the plan. I think, I did kind of put it out on Twitter. I don't think I did it on Facebook. I definitely did it on our Discord server, announced that we're going to be having a little bit of a slightly longer break in between our story episodes at the moment. We've, as listeners will know, recently been sort of putting out some kind of shorter, kind of, I don't mind saying it, sort of hastily put together, sort of one-shot small stories and sort of short storyline kind of things, with the UK tentatively relaxing, for good or worse, relaxing some social distancing measures. Hopefully we're going to be able to crack on and record our next D&D story fairly soon, which is what we were kind of gearing up to just before they went, nope, nobody can visit each other. So we've kind of made the decision to sort of put off kind of scrambling to put out sort of one shots and things, but for now we're going to keep doing these bonus episodes. They're a lot of fun. I enjoy doing them. I hope you enjoy doing them too, Eden.
Absolutely. As I say, like this, I like just the being able to look at the lay of the land, and in particular I find that it's really just informed by so much experience looking at fantasy fiction and history and all the rest of it, that like I look at the tributaries and mountains and things. I'm like, right, what could be the events that have happened here? It's a fascinating process.
Yeah, well, and we'll be doing a lot more of it, I think, because we put a poll on our Twitter recently, and more than 50% of you said you wanted to hear more world building stuff. So here we are. I hope you're happy with it.
I'm fascinated. If anybody's got comments on the thoughts that we've come up with, or the process of the ideas coming out, or if you want to criticise the fact that we're leaning it hard into history, and then I'll argue back with you about the fact that everything is based on history anyway, so it's whatever.
If you want to have a go at us for our depiction of the French, then go right ahead. But no, they're not French, they're Charlans. That's it. It's fine. But yeah, anyway, so I think we're going to be back probably, I think if we stick to our usual 2 weeks in between episodes, 2 weeks in between bonus episodes thing, we should be back in 2 weeks with another bonus episode for you. So I think probably end up being another world building one. We'll take a look at that World Anvil Summer Camp, some of the prompts on there. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Anything else to add, Eden, before I run through all the usual check us out on Facebook and Twitter stuff, or
well, I'm not really doing anything particular at the moment. I've not been writing video game reviews for a little while, so I've been a lazy bugger on that front. Can't promote anything. I suppose, in broad strokes, if you're feeling bored on a Sunday afternoon at 6 p.m. GMT, come onto the Pretending with Dice Discord server, and you'll see links to a thing called Jackbox, which I will be running. Jackbox games, bunch of silly party games that you can play on your phone, and you can literally play along with us. Like, we sit on Discord and chat on a Sunday evening from 6 p.m. So yeah, if you're bored and you feel like jumping in and having a chat with us, feel free.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, silly party game type stuff, making up jokes, drawing silly pictures for T-shirts, and then coming up with slogans for the T-shirts. You can play along on your phone, and all you need is a browser to watch the stuff. So yeah, anybody can join in. You're all welcome, as long as you're not going to be a bumhead or anything like that. But I don't think we've got bumheads in the audience particularly.
They're good people. So yeah, I mean, you already mentioned it. You can come and join us on our Discord server. The link to that is in our Twitter bio. You can also, which is, I'm bad at hosting things. It's in our Twitter bio, and our Twitter account and our Facebook account are both at Pretend with Dice, because Pretending with Dice was too long. So come find us on there, and yes, stay tuned for more very soon. 2 weeks' time should be for the next world building episode. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will see you hopefully very shortly.
Bye bye.